Ayla.
Hello, my name is Kyle Matthews. I'm Executive Director of the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies at Concordia University. I'm really pleased today to be hosting the Atlantic panel for the Canadian Women Leaders Digital Defense Initiative. This is a project that's looking to explore how Canadian female leaders working in the media and politics are targeted by online hate, online harms, online misogyny, and to kind of figure out what we can do about this, which is a growing problem and a threat to Canadian democracy when women, half the population of Canada, are afraid to enter politics or the media. It has a negative impact on our democracy. It prevents half our population from playing their rightful role in society. So we're really pleased today to have this event to discuss, in particular, what's happening in the Maritime. So in the Maritime province of Canada, what are the experiences of female political leaders? This project has come about thanks to the support of the Canadian government, in particular Heritage Canada, the Digital Citizens Initiative. We're very pleased for the support to look at what can be done to deal with online misogyny. And I would now like to hand over to our moderator for today's virtual roundtable, Alyse Hand of Global News. Alyse, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kyle. It's great to be here today, and an important and thought-provoking conversation ahead for the next hour or so. So I'm delighted to be your moderator today. We have some terrific panelists here with us from not only the Maritimes, but actually all across Atlantic Canada, including Newfoundland and Labrador today. So fantastic to get perspectives not only from journalists, but politicians and front-facing figures who often will deal with social media hate and misogyny. I know I have dealt with it personally myself, and when I was asked to speak about this and moderate today, I felt like I could share some perspective as well. I think what is so interesting about this is that people outside of politics, particularly women, and outside of media may not even realize this is happening. And I have had these conversations with so many friends, both female and male, who don't realize exactly what goes on things like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, because a lot of these things are happening through direct messages. Sometimes people are sharing publicly as well, but they're often hiding behind their keyboards, and it makes it a lot easier for people to conduct, or I guess to make posts and comments that are hate-filled and misogynistic and quite harmful, and not only to us personally and professionally, but as Kyle mentioned there, to our society and democracy. So we're going to have a conversation today. Hope you can stick with us for the next hour. At the very end of the next, about 45 minutes from now, the last 15 minutes of this session, we are going to open it up to you, the viewers. If you have questions for any of our panelists or myself, we will allow you to ask those questions and make some time for that towards the very end. So without further ado, I do want to introduce you to our panelists today. We have with us two journalists and a well-known politician in the Atlantic Canadian provinces too. We will be welcomed a little bit later in the hour by Senator Wanda Thompson-Bernard. She'll be joining us. She will just be here a little bit later in the hour, but first off, I want to introduce Lenore Zann. Lenore is the MP for Cumberland-Colchester. If you follow Lenore on any of her social media channels, she is a fierce leader, very outspoken, and we are delighted to have her on our panel today. So Lenore, I'm going to start by turning it over to you before I introduce our other panelists. Just a couple minutes to introduce yourself, Lenore. Tell us who you are, why you wanted to be a part of today's conversation, and if you can, tell us a little bit about a personal experience that you've had that's really stuck out to you when it comes to online hate.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for having me. I am Lenore Zann, and I am the Member of Parliament for Cumberland-Colchester in Nova Scotia. I've been the MP for about just a little bit over a year now. And before that, I was an MLA for 10 years, or MPP for those of you in Ontario. I was an MLA for 10 years. And to be honest, over the past almost 12 years now, I have experienced various types of online abuse, cyberbullying, misogyny, even death threats, particularly when issues come up like gun control, for instance. As soon as our government, the government of Canada, said that we were going to be introducing gun control and banning over 1,500 semi-automatic style weapons, I had said that I believed that it was never too soon to talk about gun control. And in my writing of Cumberland-Colchester, we had just experienced the largest mass shooting in Canada's history, which was an extremely traumatic event for many constituents, particularly the families and friends of those who were lost, but for all of us. We were all connected one way or another. And for me as the MP, it was very, very, very difficult. As soon as I came out and supported the gun control, I was flat out attacked by people that were gun lobbyists and gun rights lobbyists from across the country and also in the United States. And the outrageous and disgusting things that were being said to me online and behind the line, very, very upsetting. And that's just one instance. I've had a number of other things happen, but that's the most recent one. And so I'm here to talk today about why we need to continue and not to be silenced by those who hate.
Yes,
Thank
and
you.
I'm glad you said that, Lenore, because yes, this is a conversation about some of our personal experiences to start off the conversation today, but we really want to talk about ways we can not only prevent this from happening, but how we work towards that, both on a personal and more of a societal level as well. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Laura Brown. Laura is actually a former colleague of mine at CTV Atlantic, and she is a well-known reporter in our region. Laura, I'll get you to do the same here. If you could tell us a little bit about sort of what beat you tend to cover in your job as a journalist. If you could tell us a personal experience you've had that might stick out in terms of online misogyny or online bullying that you've experienced as a female journalist. And, you know, if you want to just mention why you want to be here today and why you chose to be a part of this panel. Oh, Laura, I'll just have you unmute your mic. Sorry, just noticing. There we go. There we go.
You can hear me. The question of the year. I'm Laura Brown. I've been a reporter for about 10 years in the Atlantic region. I've covered Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, mostly New Brunswick, though. And I am more of a hard news reporter. So I found myself in a couple of difficult situations, and one in particular, which really opened up my eyes to some of the online hate, if you will, that can come from being a reporter, was when I was covering protests 7-8 years ago regarding shale gas. And I remember a situation where I had said on live television that it was a terrifying situation. And somebody wrote me, found my email address and wrote me and said, "Terrifying, I'll show you terrifying." And that was one of the moments when I realized, you know, I'm exposed. And so are a lot of us. And ever since that time, you know, I've kind of grown a much thicker skin. I was 23 at the time. So you kind of learn to kind of go with it, but why should we? And that's part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation, because I just don't believe we should have to go through it anymore. And it's part of the reason why I'm so thankful that we are having this discussion specifically in Atlantic Canada.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Laura. And I've had the same experience too, I think, and I kind of alluded to this off the top here of the conversation, but a lot of people, I think, tend to build up this thick skin because it happens so often. So we're having this conversation because we shouldn't be desensitized to this. It's something that can really impact us and have a lot of long-lasting effect on journalists and politicians. So it's something that we all need to work collectively on, and hopefully this gets the ball rolling. This is just one of 4 different hour-long discussions, by the way, happening across Canada. And today we are focusing on the Atlantic region. And we are going to wrap up our introductions anyway with our 4th panelist, Kellyanne Roberts is with NTV, a reporter in Newfoundland and Labrador. I know, Kelly, you have worked across the country. So if I could have you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about the role that you have at NTV and why you want to be a part of today's discussion. And if you can tell us about an experience you've had online that stands out too.
Yes, thank you. It's been interesting because I feel like I haven't been in the industry very long. This is my 5th year and 4th with NTV. And so going through school and growing up, social media really started to take off as I was getting out of school and really getting into the industry. And now that I'm seeing it come full the way around, I'm on the other side of it. And it's really eye-opening. I didn't realize how much hate there was until probably the last year, even more so as I started to get into covering harder news. Before I kind of floated around to whatever needed to be covered. And in the past year, I've pretty well solely been on COVID, and then I helped shift to politics and court when needed. And so through that, you know, everyone has an opinion, whether their opinion is right or wrong. We hear all sides of it. And so with it, it's been really eye-opening. When I first came to NTV, one of my colleagues here was going through the instance of, when it was really big at the time, of having words yelling at you as you were doing your live hits or you're doing your stand-ups. And it was the FTIP comments that were going around. And she actually went to court over this. The RNCR police here had charged a man with it. And so when seeing her go through that process and the extra hate that came on top of that, and just doing your job and in being a woman in this industry was really eye-opening. That was in my first year at NTV here. And since then, well, it seems that tone has calmed down quite a bit. Online, it's picked up even louder, and more so through social media and the DMs and a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that when I'm tagged in things, you try to brush it off. You try not to open everything and you try not to read the comments, but that's exhausting too. And to have to limit that. And as a journalist, you really can't, because that's where you're seeing a lot of feedback and that's where you're hearing a lot of issues that people are experiencing. But what we were also getting, and what I myself got, was after a particular COVID briefing, I got a lot of hate mail. I got a lot of personal messages, essentially calling for my job, saying things about my appearance, things about my voice, things that you really shouldn't have to go through in doing your job. And in the people I was conducting with, they hadn't called anything as offside, but these viewers were. And to the point where multiple had called my boss, who ended up having to stand up because they didn't like the tone of my voice was the problem. And that was just the beginning of some of the hate. I'm very lucky in the way that I haven't experienced the death threats in a work setting or from a work environment. But, you know, it's only so long before it escalates to that point. I've been here in the newsroom when some of my colleagues, females, have received letters that had cut out lettering in them, you know, essentially threatening them, and then the police having to be involved and having to track down where these letters originated from. And so we've seen the escalation, and it's exhausting. And I think we're all tired of it and tired of having to go through it and be desensitized to it. It's not right. We shouldn't have to not look at the comments. My parents shouldn't have to see those comments. And so I think that's why it's so important we're having these conversations.
Yeah, and you know, exactly. And you, as a reporter, Kellyanne, I was a former reporter for many years as well. Your job is so full on every day when you're trying to put a story together and you have limited time to do so. The last thing you need on your plate is to have, you know, this really taxing, emotionally taxing post that, you know, someone is commenting on whether you said your voice or how you look or, you know, anything about appearance, or other than we all understand as journalists that we are going to get people who are going to critique our journalistic style, but when it comes to appearance and anything that is a gender-based opinion is really hard in the best of times, but especially hard when you're trying to do your job. So Lenore, I want to bring it back to you. When you say, I know you said gun control was one of those issues that really stands out to you as something that created a big stir online, created a lot of bullying for you and hate. Can you tell us who these people were? You know, it's hard. I know that a lot of people, they can use an avatar. You can't see who they are, but can you pinpoint who is making these comments, who is writing these comments?
I sure can. Listen, first of all, I have to say, I can relate to everything that all of the panelists have said. And I really, from my heart to you guys, I want to say I'm with you, and I understand the pain. It's horrendous. And when you are a busy person with all these different types of responsibilities, and then you see all this diatribe, basically a vomiting of disgusting, horrible, hate-filled comments, it can be really overwhelming. And I would imagine that it actually creates a very like post-traumatic stress disorder for many people until you can really get a handle on it. And after 12 years now, I've seen it get worse, especially with the online stuff, with social media. And to be honest, I call it the Trump effect, because it got really bad when Donald Trump became president. And it was almost like it gave permission to people to be rude and horrendous to women online. So I noticed that a lot of the people in that particular instance with the gun control were middle-aged white males who felt entitled to their entitlements. And it was sad to see that, but it was also sad to see women who stood up for them and also got involved in it's almost like a mob mentality. And as the person who is being attacked, psychologically, it feels like you are being mobbed. So it's not that you're in the street being mobbed necessarily, but it's surrounding you. It's in your head. And I can understand how young people feel when they're being bullied online. And in fact, we know that a number of young women in particular had committed suicide because of this cyberbullying. So yeah, I actually keep a track of who's doing it, and I keep pictures of it in case I ever need it. I have had to call the police a few times on a few different people who got very, very bad and threatening. And yeah, so I definitely keep a track of it. But again, it saddens me to see women also doing it. And I think that is internalized misogyny, personally.
Mm-hmm. I have to say I've had that experience too, Lenore. Not long ago, I've had the experience too. Mostly, what I've received in terms of online misogyny, online hate, online bullying has been from men. But there have been women too, and you're right. You said that is a perfect word. It's extremely disheartening when someone you consider an ally doesn't have your back and doesn't support you. So it's incredibly hard. Laura, I want to go back to you. Lenore kind of talked there about the emotional impact this has on her, and on, she had mentioned others too, and feeling really feeling their pain for having to go through this. In terms of the emotional impact that online bullying has had on you, I know you talked about a situation there where you received some emails and people were not too kind to you. So what have you noticed in terms of an emotional effect that this online misogyny and hate has had on you?
It's had an enormous effect, I have to say. I mean, especially earlier on in my career, I was nervous, anxious all the time. I worried about my personal safety. And I have to say, Kellyanne made this point, it has gotten worse. I mean, I only would get a few in my early career, but this last year with COVID and the briefings that we're all on, it's every other day now. And I have to say, I started to get a thick skin about the personal comments on my appearance, the way I spoke, etc. But when you criticize my reporting for not like an informative reason, I worry about that. I worry about the misinformation and the being lumped in with fake news. So I definitely have gotten many more threats or just comments, really harsh comments over the last year. And it made me so concerned about my personal safety because we are working from home and I drive a local vehicle. And so I was worried that, it was a bit easier to find where I lived. And that was one of the points I wanted to make with Atlantic Canada, is that I do think, I think it's just, we're in a smaller community, and psychologically, I was so much more concerned that people really knew where I lived. And that took a huge emotional toll on me the last year. It's just difficult. And like Lenore said, it can cause some real trauma that you bring home every day.
Laura, do you think your male counterparts, your male colleagues at CTV Atlantic are experiencing the same sort of hate and threats and just emotionally taxing emails that aren't really helping you as a journalist grow here, or they're not helping in any way? Are your male counterparts getting the same sort of feedback, would you say?
I don't think so, and it's different because I'm sure they're getting the similar, comments towards their reporting, but certainly not their appearance. And I've had a lot of support actually from male colleagues, even with this panel, and I've had a lot of support from management, where there's zero tolerance when it comes to this. I report it right away. I send it to our manager, and we have called the police before. And I do feel supported by my male colleagues, but I don't think that they get the same feedback, I'll say.
I want to ask you that same question, Kellyanne, because I think that's important here. And I know every market is different. When you ask journalists this, if men and women, we all know, statistics show us they are treated differently. But Kellyanne, when you speak with your male peers, what are you hearing in terms of the treatment you're getting online versus what they are getting online?
It's completely different. I mean, what I'm seeing online, I wouldn't even say I don't know if they see a quarter of it, to be honest. Not to say that they're not experiencing it on some level, but to the depth that my female colleagues have, I don't think so. And when we talk about it in our newsroom, and we're a very close newsroom, it's a lot more on the females on our appearance, or I looked bigger in this, or the common one in person is like, oh, you're so much smaller in person. And it's like, yeah, I am who I am. And that doesn't change, but they're not getting that to that extent. And I know it's not just about appearances. There's other things. And to Laura's point, when it comes to my reporting as well, I report the facts. I report what's put in front, and I will dig for further information. But the misinformation is what gets so scary now. And then seeing it grow, and you don't want to be lumped into it. And that's the emails that are more concerning to me at this point, because again, I can take that you don't like the way my hair's cut, or you don't like the color of my glasses. I'll brush that off. And I know we shouldn't have to at this point, but when it gets to my actual work, that's when it really gets to me. And I know it gets to my other colleagues too. And in speaking to the support we have here, it's much of the same. We all take it very seriously. Any threats that were to come into anybody, we stand as one here, which is great. And our management does the same. And if it's moved up the chain to them, and then it goes to the RNC. And luckily we have such a good relationship there as well that, I haven't seen them not take a complaint serious. And having grown up in other parts of the country, I had gone through a more serious situation outside of work where it wasn't taken serious for so long. And it escalated to a point where, a whole court case ended up happening. And so seeing the difference in the escalations, and I think having that experience always kind of puts things on the horizon for you. I'm always looking over my shoulder, waiting for that moment to happen. And I've been very fortunate here that it hasn't. And I work for a company that does take it seriously, and my colleagues look out for one another. But again, to the point of always having to do that and look over our shoulders, I'm finding it's more with my female colleagues that we're having to do it more.
Mm-hmm. I can say the same for our newsroom too. I feel like it's certainly more directed towards females. Lenore, in terms of, we just talked to two journalists about this, so I want to get the politician perspective now, female politician perspective. Do you feel supported by your superiors? What do you do when you have something like you just said there, a threat, a death threat, because you are talking openly about gun laws? Where do you go with that? How are you supported, and are you supported?
Well, it was very interesting because when it first started happening earlier in the spring last year, and in the beginning of the summer, I didn't really know what to do. I was advised by family to go to the police, And so I went to the local police just to report it. And I was told, well, do you really want us to do anything? Because do you really want to escalate the situation? And it's always hard as a politician because obviously you don't want to be in the center of a
think we may have lost Lenore there for a moment. I think perhaps a bit of a connectivity issue. We'll come back to Lenore. We'll get her log back on here in a moment. So I'm going to turn it back over to Laura and Kellyanne. I know you touched on this, Kellyanne, but I want to hear from you too, Laura. I know Kellyanne told me this certainly has gotten progressively worse. Laura, I can remember, and you and I were probably journalists at the same time, Twitter coming into play as a journalist. I started off as a journalist with Twitter not even being something we had to use every day. And I think about a year or two into my career, Twitter became the normal for us to start sharing news on Twitter. So, I mean, I think I know how you're going to answer this, but I would like to ask you just to make sure, has this gotten progressively worse, Laura, for you?
Oh, absolutely. And Twitter is actually the place where I get the most. I've gotten derogatory photos sent to my DMs. I actually didn't realize until a couple of years ago that you could shut down your DMs, and that was a huge liberating thing when I was realized that I could actually stop that, full stop. And I just think like Twitter is the place where I get the most, for sure. I was going over some of the comments that I've gotten even recently, and I've been called a dumb blonde. I've been told that I'm reporting on absolutely nothing, sweetie. I've been told that I'm worthless. And that's all on, like, many of those comments are on Twitter. There's words that I don't think we should say because they're terrible words. So like Twitter can be a great medium for reporters to get their reporting out very quickly and to keep the public informed very quickly. But it also can be a grounds for all of this behavior and trolls to kind of attack. And that can be very scary. It can also be a very scary place. So I do think that while it can be a very good tool, it's a difficult one to deal with as a reporter every day.
It's interesting that you kind of censored yourself there because, I work in morning television, so I have to be really careful. There's little kids watching in the morning, but when watching these different panels across the country, I've noticed that women in central parts of Canada and out west, when they were reading some of those tweets, which I'm glad you brought up, Laura, didn't censor themselves and just said it. I think there is a bit of a mentality with us here on the East Coast, and everyone knows this. We tend to be a really kind of nice and rise above kind of culture here, but there's also another side to, I think, the Maritimes and out east, and we're seeing a lot of that online with people being kind of hiding behind their computers. I've been seeing this for 14 years of doing television now, so I would just encourage you not to be afraid to say whatever it is that is being sent to you today. But I also think this opens up a bigger conversation, and Kellyanne, I'll ask you about this, in terms of putting these haters and bullies on blast, and do you ignore these comments, or do you respond to them, and what is the best approach and what is most effective here to get this kind of behavior to stop? Do we ignore or do we address this?
It's that balancing and trying to figure that out. I know when I first started to receive a lot of it, it was to ignore it because I felt that if I played into it, it was just going to create an atmosphere or a place for more to happen, for more people to comment in and give their hate. And then I would sit back, and sometimes I would type something up and I would delete it just to have gotten it out of my system. And then there's been a few that I feel like I've clapped back at, saying, I shouldn't have asked this or I shouldn't have done that. And you come back at them, and maybe it takes them back. And I've had a lot of people support me in it, which really shocked me. I was expecting, like I mentioned, the complete opposite. But then it also got to the point where for a long time, I didn't want to block people and I didn't want to mute people because, again, as a journalist, I felt that everyone could have their opinion. This is where, this is a place for it. but it's not a place for hate. And I gave up on that. I just started blocking anyone who was not there for the reporting or the news, but was there to make hateful comments. And then I started blocking a few people, and then other people called me out on blocking. So there's no winning on any end, but you know, in controlling what I see on some levels helps. There was a height in the past year where I actually had to delete my Facebook for about a month because there was just so much hate that had come in, and mentally I couldn't do that. My partner saw it, and I think, you know, he was the one who brought it up to be like, why don't you just take a break from social media? Because I can't take a break from my job, and my job involves a lot of social media. So Facebook was the easier outlet to take a break from, because on Twitter, like Laura mentioned, I can shut down my DMs a lot easier than you can on Facebook, and I can put out solely the information that needs to and walk away from it. And so in deciding to do that was very freeing. It was also terrifying because I felt like this just, again, opens up a sphere for more hate. But I've been lucky in the way that I've seen the opposite of that happen.
Good. Yeah, and that's interesting because, you know, sometimes you also think, and I've thought about shutting down Facebook and Twitter when you just deal with this online hate and it's coming at you from all angles, you know, but then I also feel like you're letting that person win, that bully win. They should be dealing with the repercussions, not us journalists who get a lot of our information and who have to share information on these online platforms. So that is an interesting conversation that we will continue. We're going to just take a step aside from this conversation for just a moment, because we were just joined, I believe, just a moment ago by our fourth panelist, Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard is with us now. And Senator, welcome. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. I've already asked Lenore and Laura and Kellyanne, but I'd like to ask you too, if you could just quickly tell us what you do in your role as a senator for those perhaps watching from other parts of the country today. And also asking about a personal experience that you had with online misogyny, bullying, harm, hate. If you could share that with us as well.
Thank you very much, and my apologies to everyone for the fact that I am late joining you today. As a senator, senators are supposed to be the sober second thought as part of our parliamentary system, and we're supposed to represent the views and perspectives of minorities. As an African Nova Scotian woman, and as only one of 3 people of African descent in the Senate, I feel a sense of responsibility to also speak about issues that are impacting people of African descent across the country. I would say that in doing that, in calling out issues of racism, and specifically talking about anti-Black racism, you do attract people who would rather you be quiet and would rather you be silent on these issues. I mean, that's one of several issues that I address as a senator. But I would say it's the one area that tends to attract a lot of negative attention, a lot of the misogyny, a lot of the backlash, a lot of the resistance. You see resistance with this work.
Senator,
there are attempts to silence you. Yes.
I was wondering how you address this when you do feel attacked online. You said as a racialized woman, as somebody who is in politics, and I know that the Senate did recently reach equity or equality, which was great to see as a female in journalism. That was fantastic, but there's still a lot of work to do. How do you respond to the hate online? Do you respond to it at all? How do you deal and cope with it?
I take the Michelle Obama effect.
Mm-hmm.
I recall Michelle Obama saying, when they go low, go high. That's the approach that I've taken. I have no intention whatsoever of engaging in conversations with anyone that I feel is personally attacking me or attacking the issues that I'm presenting. So I don't engage. I just do not engage.
You know, Laura, I'd like to hear your perspective, and thank you, Senator, for weighing in. I will come back to you here in just a moment. Laura, can I have you weigh in on that too? How do you address it? Do you address it? Is there a way that you've seen that is more effective compared to other ways of addressing online hate? How do you approach this?
I personally, I do this similar response to the senator and to Kellyanne. I said, like, I do not engage whatsoever. I do not give them the, ability to engage back with me. I do tend to block more than I used to. I agree with Kellyanne. I used to feel like you couldn't block anyone. But you also shouldn't have to deal with that. Like I've said before, I think at this point in my career, I can take it, but I shouldn't have to. And I think of other people who are trying to start their careers in journalism and in politics. And if they, like early on, if they had this much hate coming at them, why would they stay? And like we had said earlier on, I mean, 50% of Canadians are women. Why is it not a priority of ours to make sure that 50% are represented in both media and politics?
Laura, I think we just lost you there for a minute, but we got the bulk of what you were saying there. I think you dropped off, but I do want to turn it over to Lenore. Lenore, I just want to ask you, and Laura has kind of led into this quite nicely here. How do we address this? There are no laws in Canada right now that make, misogyny is not illegal. How do we address this? How do we make change? Does this need to be something that we work on in our political system to ensure that politicians, female journalists are better protected? How can we do this, and how can we protect our journalists, our front-facing females, our politicians?
Well, one of the things we have done is we have introduced law now about online hatred and racism and bullying. But one thing that I am now talking to government about, and talking to the Minister Monsef, for women and gender equality, is introducing a law that would make misogyny a hate crime. I think they're talking about it in England now after that young woman was kidnapped and murdered by a police officer. And different laws are being enacted around the world. And I think it's time that Canada gets on that electric bus and that we lead the way. So that's something that I really believe strongly in. And that's where I want Canada go.
Senator, I'd want to ask you the same question. I also want to ask you, when you became a senator, did you at all foresee that being online on things like Twitter, which I know I follow you on Twitter and on different social media platforms, did you at all think that the amount of hate, bullying, etc., would be as prevalent as it is? I'll start there, and then I have a second part to my question. And Senator, I'll just get you to unmute your microphone. Sorry about that. There we go.
Sorry, I'm here with my grandson, so I have myself on mute when I'm not speaking. Did I expect it? Well, yes. I mean, I've been in the public realm for much of my career, so I've dealt with these issues in different contexts. So it didn't surprise me. Let me just say that it did not surprise me, the online hate. I had preferred to not have an online presence when that became, the go-to, because I had been a victim of identity theft. And when you're a victim of identity theft in that way, you're sort of careful about what you put out there. But of course, as a senator, but even before that, I had started to develop more of an online presence. But it's challenging. It truly is challenging, and it's, for me, it's getting at that intersection of racism and sexism. We are dealing with the duality of those oppressions. So I'm not just dealing with gender, but I'm dealing with racism as well.
Right. Now, you are in a unique position in terms of our panelists here today, for sure. Lenore mentioned making misogyny a hate crime. How do we address this ongoing issue of online bullying, harassment, and misogyny, particularly among women, among racialized women? Where do we go here, Senator, to make this stop and to curb this?
I think MP Zann is onto something really critical, that we need to introduce this as a hate crime. And I think that we can do better in this country in actually dealing with hate crimes as hate crimes. Our track record in dealing with racism as a hate crime is not that good. So we need to do better. Introducing misogyny as a hate crime is good, as long as we're actually prosecuting to the best of our ability to address those issues. Part of what I see needing to happen more is that we actually have having these critical conversations in different venues is really important. And we need to encourage families and communities to have these conversations. We can't just, leave it to politicians to enact legislation. What are things that we can do in our own families, in our own communities? Are we having conversations about these issues? Are we talking about the problematics of online hate? Or are we sort of walking away from it and sweeping it under the rug? I said I don't engage in the online, but I do have conversations. Having those critical conversations is really, really important.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to turn it over to a few of our questions now from some of our viewers, and thank you to those who have tuned in from all over Canada today. This one came in, and I'm going to open up the floor to anybody who'd like to jump in. But here's the question. Does it have a different impact if the misogynistic message that you're getting online is sent from a man or a woman? Anybody want to take that one on?
I can speak here to begin. To me, no. Because I've seen it from both sides. I've received it from both genders, and that it's still a misogynistic message. It's still a hateful message. I find it a little bit more hateful or more hurtful when I see it coming from a woman, because it's so much easier for them to put themselves in my shoes. And that was the one thing, I was always taught growing up, put yourself in someone else's shoes for that moment. And so for a woman, I find it's so much easier to identify with me. And so to spew these messages and this hate, I find it harder to comprehend. But, either way, the message is harmful, it's hateful when it's coming from whoever, regardless of gender.
Good point, Kellyanne. And I think part of the problem here too, and I think we are so immersed as journalists and politicians in understanding online hate. It's sort of like we've always talked about from the beginning, we've built up this tough skin. I think a lot of people out there who are not in the public eye like we are don't understand the degree of hate that is out there and that we receive. So therefore, them writing a message that they might think is, they might think to themselves, this journalist gets this message maybe once a year, they're going to be fine. I think it's about awareness and educating other people of just how prevalent and how serious and prominent of an issue this is. And also, I would say about 80 to 90% of the comments I get that are misogynistic are from men. And I would say 10% are women that are either liking a comment that a man wrote that is misogynistic, or responding or replying to a comment and agreeing with them. And it is disheartening, but I do think it goes back to this education. And I think it's so easy for us to assume that the outside world understands what we go through in this regard with online harassment. But I do think there's a lot of education. I'm not sure how we do that, how we educate the masses about how much we receive this online hate, but it's something that we need to work on. Does anybody else want to take that question on? Again, the question is, does it have a different impact if the misogynistic message is sent from a man or a woman. Anybody have any other thoughts on that before we move on?
I wouldn't mind saying something about that. I had alluded to it earlier in that I find that what it is it's internalized misogyny. So the women who are doing it, it's like they're just amplifying the misogyny, and they don't even seem to realize that they're doing it, which is sad because I think women need to be taught from an early age. Obviously, like, don't accept that if people are treating you that way, do it to others, just as we yeah.
Yeah, and again, great point there, Lenore. This is another question that just came up. This is important to get to. I know we have about 10 minutes left, guys. This is on Facebook from one of our viewers, and I want to put this out maybe to Senator, to you first, Senator. Have you seen female journalists or politicians quit their job as a result of online harassment, and does it prevent women from running in elections?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes. I would say that one of the saddest things I think that this country has experienced is actually the fact that MP Selena Cesar Chavon's, her experiences led her to not run for a second term in office. And I think not just the decision that she made for herself and her safety and the safety of her family, but the impact that that had on other women of African descent. She was the only African Canadian woman MP, and what she experienced was pretty horrific, and she did not get the support that she needed. And I think that's an example. And if I could, just for a moment, just to step back to that previous question, I was struggling to understand where that question was coming from. And I was really pleased to see MP Lenore talk about the internalization of misogyny. And one of the ways that I would respond to that question is it's really important for us to understand the root causes of misogyny. Just like we need to understand the root causes of racism, and we need to understand the root causes of why we're seeing what we're seeing in terms of the advances and the permissions that people take with the online misogyny, the online hate, and so on. When we understand those root causes and address those root causes, the impact becomes less relevant, I think.
How do we do that, Senator? How do we address, that's the magic question, right? That's the $1 million question. How do we find out the root of all the misogyny and what you just alluded to? Like, where do we begin here? Do you have anything to say on that?
I wish I had a magic wand. I think I'll come back again to the statement earlier around the need to have these tough, courageous conversations. The need to do education and awareness. Misogyny doesn't just happen. So there's a whole educational process. There's an indoctrination process that's happening. So how do we disrupt that? How do we intervene in families and communities in a way that helps people, first of all, understand where this is coming from, and then why it's wrong, and then what do you do differently? How do we engage differently? We're not saying that people don't have the right to disagree with a perspective that's being put out there, but how we engage becomes really, really important. And should we be attacking? And why is it that women are being attacked more than men are being attacked? Why is it that men can do more of these things and come out of them? Most men, not all men. So let's be clear about that as well. So why is that? What's going on? What's going on in terms of socialization? How are we socializing male children, female children, children that are not identifying with either male or female? What's the socialization processes? What's happening in schools? And how do we create change? And I think that's fundamentally, those are some of the places that we can have the most impact, I think.
Laura, I think you're back with us, and you mentioned something that stuck with me earlier. You talked about, young journalists and young politicians seeing this online hate, hearing it from older journalists, more experienced journalists, that this goes on. And you had asked the question, why would anybody want to go into a career like this? That would make them suffer and would be a stressful career to have. What do you tell young women? I'm sure you deal with that often in your career. You're out and interacting with people. What do you tell them in terms of, for those who are interested in learning more about what you do you encourage them to go into journalism, or do you tell them, this is a tough job, maybe try something else?
Well, I definitely tell them that it is a tough job, because it is. It's not for the faint of heart. And I will say, what bothers me the most is that there are times that I encounter these or possible interviews.
I think a little bit of an issue with the darn Wi-Fi again. It always gets us. It's something us journalists and politicians deal with pretty much every day with our career and having to interact this way online. So we're used to it, but we do apologize for you at home. Hopefully Laura will be back with us. We only have a few minutes left. I want to start to wrap things up, but before I do want to get some final thoughts. I think Laura is joining us again, so we'll try to reconnect with Laura. We again have about 5 or 6 minutes left, so enough time to just kind of wrap this all up. And I know this is a conversation that certainly does not end here. We are just scratching the surface here today, but it's been a really thought-provoking and an important conversation. So Kellyanne, I'll start with you. We haven't heard from you in a few minutes. Any final thoughts today on what we've discussed here as a group today, and ways to move forward and to help address this ongoing issue?
Yes, for sure. I mean, I think a big part is to continue to have these conversations, whether they're 5-minute conversations, hour-long conversations. I think it's something that we need to talk about more. And I think particularly as women, we kind of tend to take the hate and walk and go. But in some ways, we need to stop, and we need to talk with our colleagues and talk with our friends and our family and let them see what we're experiencing and what we're seeing. Because that way we're all able to call it out, because enough's enough when it comes to it. I mean, if we can stop the lighter comments earlier, then they stop from growing into some of the more hateful messages, the more threatening messages that a lot of us have seen and experienced. And so I think having these conversations is important, but I also think even when it's hard, to call it out.
Well said for sure. I agree with you 100%. And Lenore, final thoughts as we start to wrap up the hour in terms of what we've spoken about in the last 55 minutes or so. What do you want to see moving forward here?
Well, I would have to agree that we have to call it out when we see it. I went public with it when it happened to me, and I was actually thanked by a number of female ministers for calling it out. And when people say, pull on your big girl panties, I say, are you kidding me? We didn't sign up to have a target on our back. That's not what our jobs are. So yes, and we need to have each other's back. We need to stand up for each other. And this is not okay. Just like racism is not okay, misogyny is not okay. And I do believe that it should be a hate crime.
Lenore, just because we have about 5 minutes and I have you here and you are our MP on board today, we had a question that is relevant for you. So I'm going to quickly ask you it just before I get to final thoughts from Laura and from Senator Wanda Bernard-Thompson, or Thomas Bernard, excuse me. Should we get the province to include the provinces, so the Atlantic provinces, to include social media tech literacy teachings in the education curriculum?
Absolutely. Totally. I had to go off Twitter for a whole year because of the bullying and cyberbullying and horrible stuff that happened to me there. I barely go on it now. I'm doing Facebook, but when people tag me and say horrendous things, that's it. I block, I ban. They can complain about it all they want, but I don't need to put up with that, and nobody else should either.
There you go. All right. So Interesting question there. Thank you to the viewer who sent that question, and something that I know we have talked a lot about on Global News Morning along the way too, about introducing this social media tech literacy into our education curriculum, because hey, it's 2021 and we have a lot of work to do. So Senator, I'll turn it over to you. Final thoughts on this topic.
I want to thank you. I want to come back to this piece about education and disrupting and socialization and disrupting that. I don't think anyone suddenly wakes up one day and says, you know what, I'm going to be misogynist and I'm going to write this. So something is happening in our socialization processes. Let's disrupt that. Let's determine who's best positioned to disrupt those processes, and how do we shift it to do differently? How do we engage people to think differently, to behave differently, to act differently? So in a longer term, that's something that I'd like to see happening. How do we do that? How do we engage? So it's parents, it's people who work with young people, it's teachers. I think across the board we can do better, and we must do better. And then putting legislation in place would certainly be helpful. Social media tech literacy, who are we teaching what to when we're talking about tech literacy? Are you teaching us to respond better to the misogyny? Or are you teaching us, or teaching those who are trolling, how to do it differently? So I think we need to think, my suggestion would be that we think that through a little bit more.
Yes.
We need to determine what's the best way forward. I think we need multiple strategies to help us move forward collectively.
I'd add to that, Senator, and I really like what you had to say there, but those people who have an online presence, who perhaps are not dealing with the same issues that many female politicians and journalists, and again, these public-facing personalities are dealing with, to be that voice for those who are getting this online hate, because they have that platform. So I would also just add that to the mix, but some interesting solutions there, potential solutions that you had addressed there too. Lastly, Laura, I know you've had a bit of issue. We know all about this, don't we? Our Zoom calls dropping all the time. The Zoom god's not cooperating, but wanted to see if you had some final words. And I know you were kind of just sharing your last response with us too when you got cut off. So feel free, if you remember where you left off, to pick up there, and also any final thoughts today.
I appreciate this so much, and I apologize for that. It is the world we live in, I guess, now. But I did finally want to say that it was really bothering me in the last couple of years when I would go to an interviewee and ask them, would you do an interview with me on this topic? And they would be so concerned about being, ostracized online that they said no. And then I've reached out to a couple of mayors recently and other political officials in New Brunswick who have expressed to me that they do not want to reoffer in this upcoming municipal election because of the online hate and the reception they got online over the last year specifically. So I guess my final thoughts would be, I'm so proud to be part of this conversation. I would just really ask people to think twice before they type, and that I'm with everybody. I mean, I really do think that we as women need to be stand next to each other and really, as much as this is happening, and encourage each other to step forward into these roles, because we need you now more than ever. And let me tell you, I'm an ally. Whatever, if anybody ever wanted to reach out to me to ask me about journalism, just say the word.
Fantastic, and well said there, Laura. I'd like to say too, I put the call out to our male viewers today, and anybody watching this post live, if they're watching this pre-taped version of this hour-long discussion, we need male allies to speak up on behalf of women as well. I speak from a lot of experience when I say this. We need help from you to put an end to this, and to call out those who are being misogynistic, and to do the right thing, and to educate yourself too, if perhaps you've heard something today and it sort of maybe got you thinking that you maybe participate in some of these behaviors is something that perhaps you need to be thinking about as well. So we ask that everybody work together on this. There is a lot more conversation to be had here. That is all the time we have. I just want to give one final thank you to MP for Cumberland-Colchester, Lenore Zann, of course, reporter with CT Atlantic, Laura Brown, reporter with NTV in Newfoundland and Labrador, Kellyanne Roberts, and special thanks to Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. Really appreciate it. A very important conversation today.
Keep up the good work, ladies.
Thank you.
And
It's
don't
good to
let
be part
anybody
of this.
stop